Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us again this evening for another session with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi as he shares his views on various international events from around the world. Prof, thank you for joining us again this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, and I welcome our usual listeners and viewers and new ones who may have joined since last week to what I hope will be an interesting interaction between us.
Thank you, Prof, for that. And Prof, we're starting on some good news this evening coming from the United Kingdom about the Oxford AstraZeneca um, vaccine. We obtained a copy, Prof, of a report on the Oxford vaccine that showed that giving the doses of the vaccine about 3 months apart is an effective strategy for managing some of the complications around distribution and manufacturing that has been an issue in the past few weeks. Um, Prof, what is your reaction to the findings of this study?
Um, I am very happy at whatever, uh, based on science, looks like uh, one step ahead of this virus. Um, I think that, as I said earlier, on the very first time that a vaccine came on stream, I said it is good news for the human soul, in the sense that we can now see light at the end of the tunnel. There is, in fact, another good news, um, and from Oxford as well. And no, not from Oxford, I'm sorry, from Lancet, the publication of the British Medical Association, which came out to give the Russian vaccine, Sputnik 5, um, I think 95% effectiveness. This came as a surprise to, I'm sure, everybody. And listening to the interview done with the editor of the Lancet, it even came out as a surprise to them. So what this means is really that we have, I believe, 4 vaccines out there now. We need more, definitely, no doubt about that. But it reduces the pressure on the producers. So to avoid the kind of conflict between the European Union and the Oxford vaccine, the European Union and Britain on the border between North Northern Ireland and Britain itself. The more vaccine that are out there available, it means the more that can go into people's shoulder. So I am quite happy today, and even though this virus has proved to be not only deadly, but I wouldn't want to use the word smarter than us. But for the first time, I believe I can say perhaps we are on top of this dangerous vaccine. Um, when you add to it, and I think this came out of, is it the United States or somewhere, that the existing vaccine can still cope with the various mutations that had taken place. All in all, it's good news for the human race.
Uh, Prof, you talked about the reaction of the EU and the challenge between the EU and United Kingdom about the Northern Ireland Protocol. One thing that we're seeing about the COVID-19 vaccine here is the fact that um, countries are now not they are going beyond the borders of what would have been historic relationships and just trying to do whatever is possible to get the vaccines to their countries for the benefit of their citizens. Do you think that with the increase in the number of vaccines we're getting from different countries now, that we would start to get better working relationship, better diplomacy going on between some of these countries?
I think so. You know, where death is concerned, panic and irrationality usually set in. Um, I believe it's Shakespeare who said in one of his plays about cowards die many times before their death. A valiant never tastes of death but once. Of all the things that I've seen, it seems to me most unique, I think, was the word he used, that man will fear death, which it will come when it will come. Something like that. I've probably mangled the exact words. But the thing is, man fears death. And when confronted with the possibility of death, even governments panic. Um, so, to that extent, the more vaccine we have, which are tested and have proved effective, the less that fear will be. And therefore, the more cooperative and perhaps we will see less vaccine nationalism and more cooperative internationalism in reacting to the COVID-19 and its mutants, um, because there's nothing as cheering as a problem that we've already found a solution for. Then it means it's not really a problem to that extent anymore.
All right, Prof, thank you for that. Let's move on to the developing situation in Myanmar and the coup that has taken place uh, in that region. What are your views on that, Prof?
Um, you see, uh, when you are dealing with a multicultural, a multinational, or multi-ideological nation, you've got to be careful as to how you play the democracy game. One of the issues that I have dealt with in some of my lectures has been the fact that developed countries have sold us a version of democracy which they don't practice themselves. The democracy sold us is usually one man, one vote, and that's the solution to your problems, solution to the problem of governance. solution to the problem of instability. But look at the developed countries themselves. Let's start from the United States. Their democracy is not one man, one vote. Fortunately, everybody in the world knows that by now. Because not only do you have the Senate, which dilutes the concept of one man, one vote, you also have the Electoral College. Let us look at Great Britain, the Commons, and the House of Lords. Over the years, if not over centuries, the power of the House of Lords had been watered down. But it's taken centuries to water down the power of the House of Lords. The House of Lords existed to dilute the one man, one vote result. Let us look at France. Not only do you have the Senate, you also have proportional representation, which also again dilutes the concept of one man, one vote. You go to Italy, you find the Senate and the lower house. I mean, I could just go on and on, but I believe you've got the message. Now, what is the relevance of this for Myanmar? The military had been in power for so long, it had almost become a fixed feature of what I will call the Burmese governance, the Burmese democracy. When they then decided under pressure that they were going to allow civilian rule to come back, it was under a constitution that somehow guaranteed substantial powers to the military. And in exchange, they are prepared to have civilian rule. Not undiluted civilian rule, but civilian rule of one type or the other. If I were Anshu Shin, the civilian leader, I wouldn't have encouraged my party to go in for that kind of election that practically wiped out the party of the military. I would have been wise enough to know that there would be a reaction from the military. And I would have been wise enough to convince my party that, look, let's concede sufficient constituencies to the military where we, the civilians, still have the upper hand, but we don't disgrace them. But instead, that election was held free and fair, I concede, but the result was almost total annihilation of the military party. They were disgraced. And this is what you then get in reaction. What she going to do now? All she needs to do is to look at what's happening in Belarusia, where for the past 6 months, if not more, there have been people on the streets, and yet the dictator there is sitting tight, and the world has moved on to other issues, to other problems. So I think that the crisis that we have in Myanmar now should perhaps engage the minds of professional diplomats and scholars and what have you in how you manage democracy in a country where there are fixed, powerful forces which are at each other's throat and which will need some form of cooperative democracy rather than this one man, one vote, which could exacerbate the conflicts between all these groups. I
Prof,
don't
I want
expect I don't expect the generals to change their mind. They're going to dig in. And I don't believe they will go after 1 year. That's what they have promised. But I don't believe they will go after 1 year.
but Prof, what would you talk about maybe managing the election in a way that you wouldn't have pushed out that military arm almost completely. But in a true democratic setting, if that is what the people voted for, that's what the people voted for. Is that then a responsibility we put on the ruling party or on the people who said this is what we want? How would the ruling party have gone for any other outcome other than what the people wanted without being accused of staging the election?
You talked about you predicated your question on what true democracy is. And that's what I'm questioning. That the practice of democracy varies from country to country. And I'm not talking about, Russia or Belarusia or, places where they rig elections and so on. I mean, I've drawn your attention to countries that we concede their elections are held free and fair. But I've also drawn attention to the fact that structures are put in place which dilute one man, one vote. They didn't ask. I mean, the draft of the American Constitution did not ask the Americans in 1776, what kind of democratic system do you want? Those who gathered in Philadelphia, who formed the ruling elite at that time, decided on the type of democracy that will be practiced in the United States. The same thing. You see, the elite decide on on the concrete issues. And frankly, once there is no division among the issues, the people then follow the parameters which the elite had already put in place. This is often the mistake that we make in developing countries, where you talk about what the people want. Um, the politics is not a question of throwing it to the mob. Politics is a question of the elite reaching consensus and then throwing that consensus to the public without giving them the option that there are alternatives. If you don't like this, you could vote it down. Not when it comes to that kind of structure. I mean, when last did Britain ask the British people whether they want this first part, the post form of parliamentary election, or they want proportional representation. Has that issue been ever put to the British people? No. Long, long ago, when the British system was laid down, Parliament decided on the first past the post in elections. And that's what Britain had been practicing. There are other European countries that don't practice that. Does it make Britain more democratic than the European countries? Or does it make the European countries more democratic than Britain? No.
Hmm. Prof, one thing that's quite surprising in the Myanmar coup story is the charge that the military has brought against Aung San Suu Kyi. Uh, Import export laws haven't been broken because she was using walkie talkies she was not supposed to be using. Um, Prof, I, I know there isn't a good uh, uh, reason for some of these. There isn't always a good reason for some of these things, but is that good enough a reason for one for the military to take over?
No, no, don't forget the military also borrowed the words of our dear departed former US president complaining about the election being rigged, um, the unfairness in the election being corrupt and what have you. But yeah, he's one French philosopher who said, you utter 5 words, and I will find enough in those 5 words to hang you. When you are sitting in the seat of power, you could come up with, with enough justifications, some of them ridiculous. I once, there was once a case before the Nigerian Supreme Court on an election basis where one of the parties said on election day, um, food items were being distributed to supporters of the winning party. And I think the Chief Justice had just had enough and said, but your party also was distributing food items to your own supporters. The pictures were all in the newspapers. At that point, the lawyer sat down. So, no, none of the justifications that had come up justifies, none of the arguments that the military had come up with justifies the coup. And please don't misunderstand me. Maybe I've given the wrong impression that I was justifying the coup. No. What I am saying is that the coup in Myanmar illustrates the need in developing countries not to go in for this one man, one vote kind of electoral system to underwrite the democratic system in our countries. We should go in for some form of cooperative democracy, constitutionally guaranteed, but that allows inclusiveness of the kind of concrete structures that you have in that country.
Before we leave the Myanmar story, there's a question I want to put to you, Prof. Moving the focus a little bit to Aung Suu Kyi here. And that's the fact that she's someone who came to power after having been under house arrest for so long. People celebrated her. She got Nobel Peace Prizes while she was under arrest, and all of that. So she rose up on the wings of uh, fighting for the rights of the nation. She was a political prisoner, and then came into power, and she hit this issue with the Rohingya group, where she just came crashing down. Was her style of leadership the sort of leadership you would have expected, given how tense the relationship was with the military, and the military having ruled that country for so long? Was her style the right sort of style to bring that collaboration in the first place?
What happened to her is the classic case of not making a saint out of a politician until either that politician leaves office or that politician is dead, because the issues and the difficulties and the landmines which a sitting politician faces can really chip away at the angelic structure that had been built around that politician. It's quite possible that her position on the Mohingas, because don't forget that the charge leveled was actually leveled at the military, that the military was committing genocide, not her personally, and not her government, but the military. Now, her detractors expected her to rise up and support that charge against the military. I mean, what was she supposed to do? In fact, if he had done that, this coup that we've just seen now would have happened way back then. So she had no choice. And in any case, which prime minister in the world will stand up and accept that her army or his army was committing genocide? Tell me, which prime minister will do that? The United States was confronted with this issue at the My Lai massacre. It took a brave American military officer, to come out and blow the whistle that yes, the massacre took place. And only one officer was charged to court. And even though that officer was found guilty and sentenced, he didn't spend one day in prison. He was confined to his room in the army barracks, and President Clinton finally pardoned him. Now, what she did, in what was that different from what President Nixon did in the United States? There have been charges made, allegations made about the behavior of British troops in Iraq. What has been the outcome of that trial? And did the British government stand up robustly to confront its army? No, it didn't. So, she tried to walk that fine line. And of course, she got crucified for it. And now that she's now in a position where she now has to stand up to the military. Her international status is a bit wobbly, and that may even account for, I would say, why there hasn't been a robust outcry against the coup in Myanmar.
Prof, let's move on to the United States, where we continue to see a lot of challenges with the Republican Party. On one of our programs, Prof, about 2 weeks ago or so, you raised this issue about the Republican Party and the possibility of seeing a divide across that party with those who are the far right and the more moderate within the Republican Party. Looking at the issue with Green, Cheney, and the Republican Party, what are your views on the infighting going on there, and how that whole situation has now unfolded?
Well, I think it was to be expected, especially given the attitude of Trump, who would rather destroy the House rather than gracefully giving up. We saw what he did, for which he's been impeached, and for which the trial will start next week. I think it's a continuation of it. Trump would rather destroy the Republican Party if he cannot have his way. And rather than going gracefully or ungracefully into the sunset and going to sit in his retirement home, he is involved right in the middle of the trouble that is going on in the Republican Party, egging on those who support him and creating trouble for the leadership in Congress of the Republican Party. Members of the Congress on the Republican side have been faced with this dilemma that even their constituencies are also being egged on by Trump and his political base, and therefore their political career is in danger. And that's why they cannot effectively deal with what the Republican leader in the Senate had called the cancer in the Republican Party. The compromise that the Republican Party reached yesterday, which was not to remove Miss Cheney and not to remove Congresswoman Green, is classic cop-out. We will not support either side. Classic cop-out. And now the Democrats, the decision has now been thrown into the laps of the Democrats. But let me say this before I talk about the angle of the Democratic Party, because in a way, the media also has to, I would say, re-examine its own role. I think the whatever was being taught in the school of journalism last century, 30 years ago, how effective in managing the news in this century, I think the media will have to do us a lot of soul searching. Let me give you one illustration before we talk about this. You will recall during the electioneering campaign, as soon as Kamala Harris was picked as the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, one lunatic professor of law came out of nowhere with flinging mud all over the place. And before you know it, I won't mention names, but one of the most prominent, female journalists jumped on the issue and called an American professor teaching in London to come and comment on the issue. And the man really, from the way he handled the issue, I'm sure she suffered considerable embarrassment. Because he said to her, why are you making an issue out of this nonsense? Why? Something you should just ignore. You want to give it such prominence that it then becomes an issue in the campaign? I don't even know why I agreed to come on your program to talk about this issue. And his reaction had an effect. That was the last time any journalist or any of the important media, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, dealt with that issue. Now, people are now saying that even this Congresswoman Green, is that the name?
Yes.
Yes, I suppose so. The Congresswoman who is such a staunch supporter of Trump, that why has she become such an issue? She's been turned into an idol, and that it is the fault of the press. Yes, she's gone on Twitter, she's mouthed all these things and so on, but the press has now been focusing on her for almost the past 2 or 3 weeks. The media has turned her into an issue in American politics. Of course, I expect the media will fight back to say, well, they just portrayed the news. No, I think that's a cop-out. I think the media needs to reevaluate its own role as well. When we have to deal with this issue of what is fake, what is not fake, and this and that. So, she's become an issue now, and I listened to her mea culpa, the speech she delivered on the floor of the House of Representatives about an hour ago. I listened to it, and my own reaction is she just doesn't want to lose her positions on the committees that she's been given. That's all. Deep in her heart, she still believes in all that nonsense that she had been mouthing before her election and since her election. I mean, after all, as of yesterday, she still refused to apologize. But now, when faced with the possibility of being thrown off those committees, she now apologized. But the apology to me was not sincere. She even ended up equating the media with the QAnon, that there's no difference between the mass media and QAnon. Does that show, I mean, somebody who is repentant? No. But
Prof,
I
Prof, can
think,
I ask you a question here, sir?
yes.
To what degree do you allow politicians to make statements, come out, say, I'm sorry, and we just continue with life as normal? And where we say, hey, hang on, 2 weeks ago, that was your view. Now you're coming in, you're saying, I'm sorry. At some point, we should be drawing a line to say, well, no, 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 no. That's the view you have. And for that view, we're choosing to kick you out of these kind of sensitive positions on some of these committees.
Well, you see, even, I mean, I have said earlier on that her apologies were not sincere. They didn't come from the heart. I just saw somebody who was fighting to save her political life in Congress. But even if that apology was sincere, I don't find anything wrong with saying, but you still must bear responsibility in court. If you stand up and say, well, I'm sorry I did it. My Lord, I am very, very sorry I did it. I regret doing it and so on. Well, the judge will accept your apology, but still impose a sentence. It's not going to say, okay, you can walk free since you have apologized. So if the apology then was designed to escape responsibility for the things she had said, for her positions, to me, it still wouldn't change anything. She should still be kicked off those committees as a punishment. In 6 months' time, a year's time, when you've had time to evaluate her behavior from now on, then you could bring her back. But to accept that apology and just a slap on the wrist to say, well, go and sin no more. And she used that language, I know I have sinned. And then she brought God into it, asking God to forgive her. And it was a pathetic performance. I listened to the speech from the beginning to the end. I still believe she should be kicked off those committees. Frankly, I don't know the rules in Congress. Um, I just I just think she should be suspended. Um, she should be suspended from the House of Prayer for maybe 6 months. Just being kicked off committees should not be enough, but I don't know the regulations in the United States Congress about, members whose behavior is beyond the pale.
Prof, before we leave the United States, let's talk about the decision by the Biden administration to withdraw one of the U.S. carriers from the Middle East region. Only a few programs back, we were looking at the challenge between Israel and Iran. Israel's top military strategist had just said, hey, we're getting the team to prepare for an attack on Iran. Now the US is withdrawing its carrier from the region. Is this a win for Iran in the situation between Iran and Israel?
Well, I wouldn't want to use the language of win or loss within a diplomatic ambience. Because don't forget that at the same time, Biden said the United States will not remove its embassy from Jerusalem and move it back to Tel Aviv. So, uh, typical of diplomats, is been a balancing game. Israel, I'll give you your Jerusalem as the site of our embassy. Iran will pull back uh, uh, the, the, the naval ship to let you know we don't want any confrontation with you. So one for Israel, one for Iran. That way, both parties can pull back from whatever it is they are planning, and the Biden team then buys itself more time rather than allow itself to be stampeded into taking side on an issue that has been there and that will continue to be there. So I think it's one of these win-win situation for both sides, and a win-win situation for the United States as well. You know, it's one of the, as you rightly said, we discussed it 2 weeks ago, it's one of the landmines planted by the departing uh, Trump administration that Biden has to walk his way through very carefully and not have any issue blow up in his face.
Prof, while we're on this US point, one of the things we're seeing in terms of their foreign policy, I would love to hear your comment on this, is just this week, President Putin signed an extension to the nuclear treaty between the United States and Russia. Is this showing a sign that the Biden administration is moving very quickly to close out some of these fires, or is it just coincidence?
No, it's not coincidence. Um, yes, Putin is a very smart man. He's a very smart statesman, even if he does some foolish things at times, like poisoning uh, his political, antagonists. The Russia does not have the economic power to get itself engaged in a competition over nuclear armaments with the United States. Whatever may be the problems of the United States, it still has sufficient economic power to outspend and outstrip Russia. So it is in the national interest of Russia not to get a nuclear competition started with the United States. Number two, by doing that, Putin is signaling to the United States, let's close the chapter on my relationship with Trump. I am prepared to be engaged in a cooperative relationship with the new Biden administration. So really, in a way, that it was a smart move, which was also in the interest of Russia. That's the way I read it. And coming at this time when there are a few issues pending in the relationship between the United States and Russia, one being still outstanding whether Russia was involved in the 2016 American elections. Two, the allegation that Russia was paying the Taliban bounties to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. That is outstanding. Three, on the eve of the departure of Mr. Trump, you've had that allegation that Russia had cracked into American electronic and computer network, not of companies, but of American institutions, the State Department, the Defense Department, the Treasury Department, and what have you. That report by the intelligence community is still there. So there are many outstanding issues on which the United States has grievances against Russia. So this may be a positive step to signal that maybe let bygones be bygones, we can move on to a positive relationship. It's not going to work because the outstanding issues are ones that really affect the national interest of the United States. That was a good move, nevertheless.
One more question on Russia here, Prof, is the arrest and sentencing to jail of the Russian opposition leader Alexei. Um, is this one of those moments you say Trump, Vladimir Putin gets involved in some things that don't make sense? Is this one of them?
You know, I've been giving it a lot of thought since it happened. Did Novotny set a trap for Putin, and did Putin walk into that trap? Because Novotny knew he was going to be arrested if he returned to Russia. In fact, most political antagonists of Putin will give an arm and a leg to be outside Russia, where they will feel they are safe. And yet, Novotny walked back into knowing what was going to happen. Now, I don't believe that Putin had a choice. It would have been a sign of weakness if he had decided to do nothing and just allow this guy to walk back. This man would have walked from the airport. In fact, he would have been carried shoulder high from the airport through the street of Moscow to the walls of Kremlin, because finally he had shown that Putin could be outsmarted. Could Putin, after all this, has feet of clay? So I don't think Putin had a choice but to have him arrested and put, and knowing fully well what's going to happen. I don't believe he will spend the 2.5 years to which he's been jailed. There are several other cases outstanding. And don't forget that, again, to go back to an example I cited, for how many months did you have demonstrations on the streets of I can't remember now the name of the country where they rigged the elections. Uh, and at the end of the day, the man is still sitting there tight. So all the demonstrations we are having on the streets of Moscow, St. Petersburg, and what have you, I think they will fade out. It's shown enormous courage by the demonstrators. I actually do salute them. The weather had not been on their side. You know, if you'd ever gone to Moscow in winter, which I have done, believe me, you wouldn't want to be on the streets demonstrating, not only facing the winter outside, but I'm sure Moscow cells are not heated. They are not heated. So it's almost, double you you are facing double danger weather-wise. But so they've shown enormous courage. But they're human beings. I don't think a month from now we'll still be seeing those demonstrators on the street. I don't think so.
Prof, one last question. We have about 1 minute to go, but I'm going to throw this question to you anyway. Increasingly, we're seeing um, this rise in demonstrations all over the world, whether it's in Africa, in the United States, in Poland, Russia, Belarus. Are we starting to see uh, a cumulative effect of all these demonstrations starting to increase the willingness of people to fight for their rights, irrespective of the country they're in? And is there a likelihood that all these uprisings just continues to embolden people in other countries to do likewise and fight for their rights?
Good summary of what has taken place. I think there's been a lack of confidence by the people in their governments. Uh, Governments in several countries all across the ideological divide have not shown that sure-footedness in dealing with issues that matter to the people. And I think that the people are taking out their frustration against their governments by taking to the streets uh, um, and exercising what we will call people's democracy. And that's also part of what I was saying earlier on, that elections don't necessarily solve all the problems, not even the major problems that people face and that will want governments to be addressed. I think, and the COVID-19 has simply added to that lack of confidence in the way in which government has handled it. Not that government could have done any better, but it has just whipped up the people's, emotional reaction against their governments.
Prof, thank you once again for another enlightening session. We have run out of time tonight. I want to thank our viewers, those who have been with us right from the beginning. Please don't forget, share this link with your friends every Thursday evening, 7 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. in Nigeria. Uh, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi is here addressing issues all across the nations of the world. We want to thank you for joining us. Prof, any final words before we go?
Oh, just um, to thank our viewers um, for their patience, and for joining what I call this community of interested people in not letting the world go astray. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to our viewers. See you next week.